The piece of paper sitting on my mahogany desk felt heavier than it actually was. It was just a standard legal document, a few crisp white pages stapled at the corner, but it carried the weight of a tombstone. My tombstone. The glowing desk lamp cast long, sharp shadows across the bold black lettering at the top of the page. Petition for emergency conservatorship. Below that, in the cold clinical language of the court, was the assertion that I, Margaret Vance, founder and CEO of Vance Biotech, was suffering from advanced cognitive decline. The document claimed I was erratic, unstable, a danger to the company I had built from the ground up. It requested that my legal rights, my finances, and my controlling shares be immediately transferred to the petitioner to prevent the imminent collapse of the corporation. And there, at the bottom of the last page, resting innocently above the signature line, was the name of the petitioner, Chloe Vance, my daughter. I didn't cry. At 62 years old, you learn that tears are a luxury you can rarely afford, especially when you are a woman who has spent 30 years surviving in the shark-infested waters of the pharmaceutical tech industry. Instead, I reached out with a perfectly steady hand, picked up my crystal tumbler, and took a slow, burning sip of bourbon. The amber liquid scorched my throat, a sharp reminder that I was still very much alive, very much awake, and, contrary to the document in front of me, entirely in possession of my faculties. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. "Arthur," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, echoing in the cavernous silence of my corner office. "Margaret, it's past midnight. What's wrong?" Arthur Sterling's gravelly voice came through the speaker. He had been my general counsel, my confidant, and my closest friend for over 2 decades. "She did it," I said, staring at the loops of Chloe's signature. "She actually filed the petition." There was a heavy, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Arthur exhaling slowly. "I'll be at your house at 7 a.m., he finally said. "Bring the documents. And Margaret, don't let her see you bleed." "I have no intention of bleeding, Arthur," I replied, my voice turning to ice. "I intend to go to war." I hung up the phone and leaned back in my leather chair, letting the darkness of the room swallow me. How did we get here? How does a mother who gave everything, her youth, her sleep, her very soul, to provide her child with an empire, end up being hunted by that exact same child? It wasn't a sudden betrayal. Betrayals of this magnitude never are. They are slow, creeping things. Like a crack in the foundation of a house, you don't notice it until the roof is caving in on your head. To understand the sheer, breathtaking cruelty of what Chloe was doing, you have to understand what Vance Biotech is. It isn't just a company. It is my life's blood. 30 years ago, I was a single mother sitting at a tiny laminate kitchen table, typing grant proposals on a secondhand computer while a 2-year-old Chloe slept in a laundry basket at my feet. I had a degree in biochemistry, a brilliant idea for a new method of synthesizing targeted drug delivery proteins, and exactly $42 in my checking account. I endured the patronizing smiles of male venture capitalists who patted me on the head and told me my projections were cute. I endured the sleepless nights, the missed school plays, the crushing guilt of choosing a pitch meeting over a PTA bake sale. But I did it all for her. Every late night, every battle fought in a boardroom, every time I had to make myself harder, sharper, and colder to survive in a man's world. It was to ensure that Chloe would never have to struggle the way I did. I built a billion-dollar biotech firm, and when Chloe graduated from Stanford with her MBA, I didn't just give her a job. I gave her a kingdom. I brought her in as the director of innovation, and over the years I mentored her, molded her, and eventually promoted her to chief strategy officer. We were the golden duo of the industry, the visionary founder and her brilliant, modern-minded heir apparent. Magazine covers called us the matriarchy of medicine. But the media didn't see what was happening behind the frosted glass doors of our executive suites. They didn't see the entitlement that had begun to rot my daughter from the inside out. The shift started 6 months ago. The catalyst wasn't an argument or a familial dispute. It was a man named Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a managing partner at a massive Wall Street venture capital firm. He was 45, wore suits that cost more than my first car, and had the sleek, predatory smile of a man who was used to buying whatever he wanted and destroying whatever he couldn't. He wanted Vance Biotech. Specifically, he wanted to acquire us, strip the company down, sell off our proprietary patents to a massive pharmaceutical conglomerate, and lay off the 600 employees I considered family. He took Chloe and me to dinner at a ridiculously expensive, dimly lit restaurant in Manhattan to make his pitch. He talked about synergy, market capitalization, and liquidity events. He dangled a buyout number with so many zeros it would make a sane person dizzy. I let him finish his Wagyu steak, wiped my mouth with a linen napkin, and looked him dead in the eye. "No," I said simply. "Vance Biotech is not for sale. We are on the verge of clinical trials for a drug that will fundamentally change how autoimmune diseases are treated. I will not let you carve up my life's work for parts so you can buy your third yacht, Mr. Thorne." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Margaret, you've had a wonderful run. Truly, you're a pioneer. But the market is moving faster than you are. You're clinging to the past. It might be time to let the younger generation take the wheel." "The wheel is firmly in my hands," I replied, standing up and dropping a $100 bill on the table for my glass of wine. "Enjoy the rest of your meal." As I walked out, I glanced back. Chloe hadn't followed me. She was still sitting at the table, leaning in, listening intently as Marcus poured her another glass of wine. I should have recognized the look in her eyes right then. It wasn't loyalty, it was naked, unadulterated ambition. From that night on, the atmosphere in the office changed. The daughter I knew, the one who used to come into my office to kick off her heels and complain about the marketing department over takeout sushi, vanished. In her place was a woman who looked at me not with respect, but with a terrifying, calculating pity. Chloe believed Marcus. She believed I was a dinosaur, an aging relic standing in the way of progress. But she also knew that as long as I held 51% of the voting shares, she couldn't force a sale. She couldn't just outvote me. She had to remove me. And in corporate America, the easiest way to remove an older woman from power is to convince the world she is losing her mind. The psychological warfare, the gaslighting, began with things so small I genuinely thought I was just overtired. It started with a missing file. We were preparing for a crucial quarterly board meeting. I had spent the weekend reviewing the financial projections, making extensive notes in the margins of a thick, blue-tabbed binder. I left it on the center of my desk on Monday evening. On Tuesday morning, it was gone. I tore my office apart. I checked my briefcase, my car, my home office. Nothing. When I walked into the boardroom, empty-handed and flustered, Chloe was already there, chatting amiably with the board members. "Mom?" she asked, her voice dripping with artificial syrupy sweetness. "Are you all right? You look frantic." "I can't find the Q3 projection binder," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I left it right on my desk." Chloe exchanged a subtle, sorrowful glance with our CFO. "Mom, we talked about this yesterday. You said you were going to take it home to review it again. You must have left it at your house." "I didn't take it home, Chloe. I left it on my desk," I insisted. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. Had I taken it home? Had I been so exhausted that I forgot my own actions? "It's okay, Margaret," one of the older board members said gently, far too gently. "We have digital copies. Let's just sit down. We all misplace things." I sat through that meeting feeling like a child who had been scolded. Chloe ran the presentation flawlessly. Every time she flipped a slide, she cast a brief, worried look in my direction. Just enough to make sure everyone in the room noticed her concern for her aging mother. The incidents escalated. A week later, I missed a crucial lunch meeting with our lead manufacturing partner. I was sitting in my office, working through emails, when I got an angry phone call from the partner asking why he had been sitting at the restaurant alone for 45 minutes. I pulled up my digital calendar. The time slot was completely empty. I called my assistant, a sweet, relatively new girl named Sarah, into my office. "Sarah, why wasn't the lunch with the manufacturing team on my calendar?" Sarah looked terrified, clutching her tablet to her chest. "Ms. Vance, Chloe told me you asked her to cancel it. She said you weren't feeling well and that you were having trouble remembering your schedule, so she was going to handle the partner relations this week." My blood ran cold. "Chloe told you that?" "Yes, ma'am. She said we needed to help manage your workload because you were getting overwhelmed and confused lately. She asked me to route all your meeting requests through her first." I dismissed Sarah and locked my office door. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the sprawling campus I had built. My own daughter was systematically dismantling my credibility. She was building a narrative, brick by brick, that I was slipping into senility. She was planting the seeds in the minds of my assistant, my executives, and my board of directors. When you are an older woman in a position of power, society is already waiting for you to fail. They are waiting for the moment you become too emotional, too tired, or too old. Chloe wasn't just using my age against me, she was weaponizing my motherhood. By playing the role of the devoted, heartbroken daughter stepping up to protect her declining mother's legacy, she made herself bulletproof. If I lashed out, if I accused her of lying, I would just look exactly like what she claimed I was: paranoid, erratic, and mentally unstable. The brilliance of her cruelty was breathtaking. The climax of her psychological torture happened just 2 weeks ago. Chloe came into my office, closed the door, and sat on the sofa. She looked exhausted, playing the part of the weary caretaker to perfection. "Mom, we need to talk." I didn't look up from my laptop. "I'm busy, Chloe. What is it?" "It's about your health," she said softly. "People are noticing, Mom. The board is noticing. You're forgetting things. You're repeating yourself in meetings. You sent an email to the legal team yesterday that made absolutely no sense." I stopped typing and stared at her. "I am perfectly fine, Chloe, and I know exactly what you are doing." She sighed, a practiced tragic sound. "This is exactly what I mean. The paranoia, the defensiveness. Mom, I love you. You built this company, and I will not let you destroy your own legacy because you're too proud to admit you need help." She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a sleek, glossy brochure. She slid it across my desk. It was for an exclusive, high-end neurologist in the city, a doctor specializing in early-onset Alzheimer's and dementia. "I made an appointment for you," Chloe said, her eyes welling up with tears that I now knew were completely manufactured. "Just for an evaluation. Please, Mom. For me. Prove me wrong." I looked at the brochure. Then I looked at my daughter, the little girl who used to hold my hand so tightly crossing the street. The teenager I had stayed up with until 3 a.m. helping with chemistry homework. The woman I had handed the keys to my kingdom. She wasn't asking me to go to the doctor because she was worried about my mind. She was asking me to go because she needed a medical record to validate her coup. She was setting the final trap. I picked up the brochure and slipped it into my drawer. "Fine," I said smoothly, my voice devoid of any emotion. "If it will ease your mind, I will go to your doctor." Relief washed over her face. Not the relief of a daughter, but the relief of a predator whose prey had finally walked into the cage. "Thank you, Mom. I'll go with you. I'll be right by your side." And she was. Last Tuesday, Chloe sat next to me in the plush waiting room of Dr. Harrison's clinic, holding my hand and gently rubbing my knuckles. When we went into the examination room, she did all the talking. She painted a tragic picture of a brilliant woman losing her grip on reality. She detailed the forgotten meetings, the misplaced files, the erratic behavior. Dr. Harrison, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair, listened with grave sympathy. He asked me a series of standard cognitive questions. Count backward from 100 by sevens. Remember these 5 words. Draw the face of a clock showing 10 minutes past 11. I did it all perfectly. I answered every question with sharp, calculated precision. I could see the slight tightening of Chloe's jaw every time I gave a flawless answer. When the exam was over, Dr. Harrison asked Chloe to step out so he could speak to me privately. The moment the door clicked shut, his sympathetic demeanor vanished, replaced by a professional clinical coldness. "Ms. Vance," he said, clasping his hands on his desk. "Cognitively, you are testing within normal limits for a woman of your age." "I know I am," I replied evenly. "However," he continued, leaning forward, "your daughter has provided extensive documentation of behavioral changes that cannot be ignored. Memory tests don't always capture the full picture of executive function decline. Combined with the immense stress of running a billion-dollar corporation, I believe it is my medical duty to recommend a temporary step down from your duties, a period of rest and further more invasive neurological observation." I stared at him. I noticed his expensive Patek Philippe watch. I noticed the brand new MRI machine down the hall that, according to a plaque on the wall, had been recently donated by a subsidiary of Marcus Thorne's venture capital firm. It hit me with the force of a physical blow. The doctor wasn't independent. The evaluation wasn't real. The entire medical consultation was a bought and paid for theater production designed to generate the exact piece of paper Chloe needed to legally strip me of my power. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a fit. I simply smiled, thanked Dr. Harrison for his time, and walked out into the waiting room where Chloe was waiting, looking like the picture of devoted concern. "How did it go?" she asked, putting a hand on my shoulder. "He thinks I need rest," I said, my voice hollow. Chloe hugged me, a cold, suffocating embrace. "It's going to be okay, Mom. I've got you. I'll handle everything at the office." That was a week ago. And now, sitting in my dark office at midnight, staring at the petition for emergency conservatorship, I knew the endgame had arrived. The document included an affidavit from Dr. Harrison stating I was medically unfit to manage my own affairs, and a sworn statement from Chloe claiming she needed immediate control of Vance Biotech to save it from my rapid decline. They thought I was broken. They thought I was a tired, sentimental old woman who would quietly fade into the background, crying over old photo albums while they looted my life's work. They thought because I had silver hair and a mother's heart, I no longer had teeth. They were wrong. I wasn't the prey. I was the apex predator who built the jungle they were playing in. And if my daughter wanted to use the law, the board, and the company against me, then I was going to teach her a lesson she would never, ever forget. I was going to let her think she was winning. I was going to let her walk right up to the throne. And then I was going to burn it to the ground with her inside it. Arthur arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, bringing the smell of impending rain and a thermos of black coffee into my immaculate kitchen. He didn't bother taking off his trench coat. He just dropped his leather briefcase onto the marble island, opened it, and pulled out a duplicate copy of the conservatorship petition I had been staring at for the last 7 hours. "I read it on the drive over," Arthur said, his voice grave. He poured 2 mugs of coffee and pushed one toward me. "It's a masterpiece of character assassination, Margaret. They aren't just questioning your memory. They are painting a picture of financial recklessness and emotional instability. And with Dr. Harrison's sworn affidavit attached, a judge might actually grant a temporary injunction. They could freeze you out of your own bank accounts by Friday." I took a slow sip of the coffee. Dr. Harrison's new clinic wing was funded by a shell company connected to Marcus Thorne. I spent 3 hours last night tracing the LLCs through Delaware public records. It's a payoff, Arthur. Arthur rubbed his temples, a habit he only exhibited when a case was particularly venomous. Even if we suspect that, proving a quid pro quo between a respected neurologist and a Wall Street venture capitalist takes months of subpoenas and forensic accounting. We don't have months, Margaret. We have days. Chloe has called for an emergency board meeting next Wednesday. Her goal is to use this petition to force a vote of no confidence before you even get a chance to stand before a judge. She wants a bloodless coup, I murmured, tracing the rim of my mug. She wants the board to panic, strip me of my CEO title, and hand her the reins to avoid a public legal scandal. Exactly, Arthur agreed, leaning heavily against the counter. So we fight back. I can pull your complete medical history, have you evaluated by 3 independent specialists by Monday, and we walk into that boardroom with an ironclad defense. No, I said softly. Arthur stopped halfway through a sip of his coffee. He stared at me. Excuse me? I said no, Arthur. Defending myself means I am validating her premise. If I walk into that room waving medical clearance forms, I look desperate. I look like exactly what she says I am, a paranoid old woman clinging to the curtains as the house burns down. I looked up, meeting his eyes with a cold, absolute clarity. We are not going to defend. We are going to let her dig her own grave, and then we are going to push her in. To defeat Chloe, I had to stop being Margaret Vance, the brilliant CEO, and start playing the exact role she had written for me. The fading, confused mother. I had to lean into the gaslighting. For the next 4 days, I became a ghost in my own company. I started leaving my office door open while I stared blankly out the window. I asked my assistant, Sarah, the same questions twice in 1 hour. I deliberately left my reading glasses in the employee break room and wandered the halls looking for them. It was humiliating. Every time I played the fool, I could see the pity in the eyes of my staff. But I also saw Chloe. I watched my daughter from the corner of my eye, observing the subtle, triumphant smirk she tried to hide behind a mask of tragic concern. She was eating it up. She thought her psychological warfare had finally broken my spirit. But while I was playing the victim in the daylight, I was hunting in the dark. I needed proof that the accidents and misplaced files were sabotage. I couldn't just accuse my daughter of corporate espionage without a smoking gun. The answer came from the most unlikely of places. On Thursday afternoon, I was sitting in my office, pretending to struggle with the new company software, when a young man knocked hesitantly on my door. He was maybe 26, wearing a slightly wrinkled button-down shirt and clutching a manila folder to his chest like a bulletproof vest. I recognized him vaguely. Liam Davies, a junior data analyst in the IT security department. He was the kind of employee Chloe never looked at twice because he didn't wear a designer suit or have a golf handicap. "Ms. Vance?" Liam asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course, Liam. Come in." "Please close the door," I said, dropping the confused old lady act instantly. My voice was sharp, resonant, and entirely lucid. Liam blinked, clearly startled by the sudden shift in my demeanor. He locked the door and walked over to my desk, sliding the manila folder across the polished wood. I wasn't sure if I should bring this to HR or to you directly," Liam stammered, adjusting his glasses. "But HR reports to the executive committee and, well, I thought you should see this first." I opened the folder. Inside were pages of raw server logs, highlighted in bright yellow ink. I was doing a routine audit of the localized server traffic, Liam explained, gaining a bit of confidence as he spoke about his domain. "You reported your Q3 projection files missing last month. Everyone said you misplaced them. But Ms. Vance, digital files on our encrypted drives don't just disappear. I pulled the logs. The files weren't lost. They were deleted." I leaned forward, my heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "Deleted by whom?" Liam pointed a trembling finger at a specific string of IP addresses and login credentials. "They were remotely wiped from your local drive at 2:14 a.m. on a Sunday. The login credentials used to access your terminal belonged to the chief strategy officer. Chloe, my own flesh and blood, had used her executive access to digitally break into my computer, delete my work, and then stood in a boardroom the next day and told the world I was losing my mind." "Is there more?" I asked quietly. Liam nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, ma'am. Emails diverted from your inbox to a hidden quarantine folder. Calendar invites intercepted and deleted before you could see them. It's been happening systematically for the last 5 months. All originating from Ms. Vance's Chloe's IP address. I didn't know what to do. The narrative around the office is that you're, well, you know. But the data says you're being sabotaged." I looked at this young man. He was risking his career, his livelihood, to bring me the truth because he believed in the integrity of his work more than he feared the power of my daughter. "Liam," I said, closing the folder and locking my eyes onto his, "you are going to copy these logs onto a secure offline flash drive. You will wipe your search history from the mainframe, and then you are going to help me build a trap." Having the technical proof of Chloe's sabotage was empowering, but it didn't answer the lingering, agonizing question, why? I knew Marcus Thorne was whispering in her ear, promising her a golden parachute if she sold the company to his venture capital firm. But Chloe was already wealthy. She was already powerful. Greed alone didn't entirely explain the sheer venomous urgency of her betrayal. I found out the truth on Friday night. It was the moment the last frayed thread of my mother's heart finally snapped. The office was mostly deserted by 8 p.m. I had stayed behind under the pretense of forgetting how to log out of my workstation. The cleaning staff was operating on the lower floors. As I walked down the dim, carpeted hallway toward the private elevator, I noticed a sliver of light spilling out from under Chloe's office door. I stopped. The air in the hallway was dead quiet. I didn't intend to eavesdrop. I actually intended to walk in and confront her, to look her in the eye and ask her how she could sleep at night. But as my hand hovered over the brass doorknob, I heard a voice crackling over her speakerphone. It was Marcus Thorne. "The timeline is accelerating, Chloe," Marcus's voice echoed, dripping with impatience. "My partners are getting antsy. We need the Vance biotech patents finalized for the merger by the end of the quarter, or the deal is dead." "I'm handling it, Marcus," Chloe's voice replied. It didn't sound like the confident, arrogant daughter I knew. She sounded panicked, desperate. "The emergency board meeting is Wednesday. The conservatorship petition is filed. The board is terrified the stock will tank if word gets out that the CEO is senile. They'll vote her out. I just need a few more days." "You don't have a few more days," Marcus snapped. "You owe my firm $7 million, Chloe. Did you think we wouldn't find out about the creative accounting you used during that failed startup venture 2 years ago? You embezzled investor funds to cover your own catastrophic market shorts." I stopped breathing. My hand froze over the doorknob. Embezzlement. I didn't embezzle, Chloe hissed, her voice trembling. It was a temporary reallocation of funds. I was going to put it back. The SEC doesn't care what you call it, sweetheart, Marcus chuckled, a dark, ugly sound. It's wire fraud. It's a federal crime. I've kept my auditors quiet because you promised me Vance Biotech on a silver platter. You promised me you could control the old lady. If you don't deliver her voting shares to me by next Friday, I hand your file over to the federal prosecutors. You won't be sitting in a corner office. You'll be sitting in a federal penitentiary. There was a long, agonizing silence. I'll get it done, Chloe whispered, her voice devoid of any warmth, any humanity. Her memory is completely shot anyway. She's practically a ghost already. Next week she'll be gone. Just keep your mouth shut until I have the power to bury my audit. I pulled my hand back from the door as if the metal had turned to molten lava. I backed away, my expensive heels completely silent on the thick carpet. I walked back to my office, locked the door, and sank into the leather sofa. It wasn't just ambition, it was survival. Chloe had dug herself a massive illegal hole, and instead of coming to me, her mother, the woman who would have moved heaven and earth, paid any fine, hired any lawyer to save her, she chose to throw me to the wolves to save her own skin. She was willing to destroy my life, my reputation, and my sanity, just to cover up her own crimes. For 32 years, I had loved her with a fierce, unconditional fire. But sitting in the dark that night, listening to the hum of the city traffic below, that fire went out. It didn't leave behind ashes. It left behind ice. She was no longer my daughter. She was a liability. She was an infection in the body of my company, and it was time for a surgical removal. The next morning, I met Arthur and Liam at a private booth in a diner 20 miles outside the city, far away from the prying eyes of the corporate district. She's backed into a corner by Marcus Thorne, I told them, keeping my voice low and devoid of emotion over the clatter of silverware. She has committed wire fraud, and Marcus is blackmailing her into this hostile takeover. Arthur's eyes widened. Margaret, if she's being blackmailed, we can go to the authorities. We can blow Marcus out of the water. No, I said, slicing my toast with terrifying precision. If we expose Marcus now, Chloe goes to prison, and as much as she might deserve it, I will not allow the Vance name to be dragged through a federal indictment. It would destroy the company's stock, panic our investors, and ruin the clinical trials. The collateral damage to our employees would be catastrophic. So what do we do? Liam asked, looking between Arthur and me, his eyes wide with adrenaline. We feed her exactly what she wants, I said, pulling a blank legal pad from my tote bag. Chloe needs a silver bullet for the board meeting on Wednesday. She needs something so damning, so immediately destructive, that the board won't even wait for the conservatorship judge. They will strip me of my power on the spot. I looked at Liam. Liam, how good are you at manipulating internal financial dashboards? The young analyst blinked. I mean, I have administrative access. I can alter the visual data outputs on the secondary servers without touching the actual legally binding master ledgers. Why? Because, I said, a slow, predatory smile touching the corners of my mouth, you are going to help me create a ghost report. Over the next 4 hours, the three of us drafted the ultimate piece of bait. It was a fabricated, highly confidential internal financial report. The data we inputted showed that over the last 3 months, due to my erratic and confused decision-making, I had quietly authorized a series of disastrous R&D investments that were currently hemorrhaging millions of dollars from the company's liquid reserves. It painted a picture of a company mere weeks away from insolvency. It was entirely fake. The master ledgers, secure in the vault of our corporate bank, showed Vance Biotech was having its most profitable quarter in a decade. But the digital dashboard Liam rigged looked absolutely authentic to anyone who didn't have the highest level of cryptographic clearance, which Chloe did not. Now, I said, sliding the printed, heavily stamped confidential report across the table to Liam. You are going to print this from the secure executive server. You are going to put it in a red folder. And on Monday afternoon, you are going to accidentally leave it in the copying machine on the executive floor right before Chloe goes to make her afternoon espresso. Arthur leaned back in his vinyl booth, shaking his head in a mixture of awe and terror. Margaret, if she brings that report to the board meeting and presents it as fact— She will, I interrupted, my voice as cold as absolute zero. She is desperate. She won't verify it with the master ledger because she doesn't have the time, and because it confirms her own bias. She wants to believe I'm destroying the company. She will take that folder, she will walk into the boardroom on Wednesday alongside Marcus Thorne, and she will try to use it to cut my throat. I took a sip of my black coffee, letting the bitterness coat my tongue. And when she does, I finished softly, she will commit corporate perjury, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraud in front of the entire board of directors and the company's legal counsel. We won't have to fire her, Arthur. The board will do it for us. The trap was set. The bait was laid. All I had to do now was wait for Wednesday, walk into that boardroom, and let my daughter destroy herself. Monday afternoon arrived with the slow, agonizing crawl of a predator stalking its prey. I sat in my office, the door cracked open just an inch, pretending to be engrossed in a physical newspaper. In reality, my eyes were fixed on the reflection in the glass partition that looked out onto the executive floor's central hub. At 2:15 p.m., Liam Davies walked casually past the high-volume corporate copier, a stack of innocuous documents in his hands. Mixed in with them was the red folder. He set the stack down, loaded the paper tray, and then walked away, leaving the bright red folder sitting conspicuously on the output tray. It was stamped with the words, Confidential Q4 Liquidity and R&D Expenditure. 10 minutes later, Chloe emerged from her office to get her afternoon espresso. I watched her perfectly manicured hand reach for the machine. I watched her eyes dart to the copier. She paused. She looked around the empty hallway. Then she stepped over, slid the red folder out of the tray, and quickly opened it. Even from 20 feet away, through the reflection in the glass, I could see her posture change. The tension in her shoulders vanished, replaced by a sudden electric stillness. She was looking at the ghost report. She was looking at fabricated data that proved I was secretly funneling tens of millions of dollars into dead-end research, bankrupting Vance Biotech under the fog of dementia. She didn't take the folder to HR. She didn't bring it to me, her mother, to ask for an explanation. She snapped the folder shut, tucked it tightly under her arm, and walked briskly back into her office, locking the door behind her. The hook was in. She had swallowed it whole. Tuesday was a masterclass in psychological endurance. Chloe was practically glowing. The faux concern she had worn for months was slipping, replaced by the barely contained adrenaline of a woman who believed she was 24 hours away from a coronation. She checked in on me twice, her voice dripping with that sickening maternal condescension she reserved for the elderly. "Did you eat lunch, Mom? Do you need me to look over those contracts for you? You look so tired." "I'm fine, Chloe," I had replied, offering her a weak, trembling smile. "Just a little confused about the new billing software. I'll let you handle it." "Of course, Mom. Don't you worry about a thing," she said, her eyes shining with predatory triumph. When Wednesday morning finally broke, the sky over Manhattan was the color of bruised iron. I stood in front of my walk-in closet, bypassing the soft cashmere cardigans and pearls. Pearls are for grandmothers baking cookies. Cardigans are for women who have surrendered. Today, I was going to war. I pulled out a bespoke charcoal gray Armani suit with lapels sharp enough to cut glass. I pinned my silver hair back into a severe, immovable twist. I applied a slash of deep crimson lipstick. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a grieving mother. I saw the CEO of Vance Biotech. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the glass-walled boardroom on the 40th floor. When I walked in at 9:55 a.m., the room was already full. The heavy mahogany table was surrounded by 12 members of the board, mostly older men in conservative suits who had known me for decades, yet who now looked at me with varying degrees of discomfort, pity, and impatience. Arthur Sterling sat to my right, his leather briefcase resting on his lap. He gave me a single, imperceptible nod. At the far end of the table sat Chloe. She wore a soft beige dress, a deliberate psychological choice to make herself look approachable, innocent, and pure. And sitting in the leather chair directly behind her, technically a guest observer, but radiating the entitlement of an owner, was Marcus Thorne. He offered me a slick, practiced smile as I took my seat at the head of the table. "Good morning, everyone," Thomas, the chairman of the board, began, clearing his throat nervously. He was a retired pharmaceutical executive who hated conflict. "This emergency session was called by our Chief Strategy Officer, Chloe Vance. Chloe, the floor is yours." Chloe stood up slowly. She didn't look at me. She looked at the board members, making sure to make prolonged, empathetic eye contact with the oldest men in the room. "Thank you, Thomas," she began, her voice remarkably steady, laced with just the right amount of manufactured sorrow. "This is the hardest day of my professional life, and it is certainly the most painful day of my personal life. I called this meeting because we are facing a crisis that threatens the very existence of Vance Biotech, a crisis of leadership." She gestured toward me, her hand trembling slightly, a brilliant theatrical touch. "As many of you have noticed over the past 6 months, my mother, Margaret, has been struggling. What started as misplaced files and forgotten meetings has rapidly escalated into severe cognitive decline." A heavy silence fell over the room. Thomas looked down at his legal pad. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table, my face an unreadable mask of stone. "I tried to manage it internally," Chloe continued, her voice breaking perfectly on cue. "I tried to protect her legacy. But yesterday I discovered something that forces my hand. I discovered that her declining mental state is no longer just a tragedy. It is an active, fatal threat to our fiduciary obligations." She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out the bright red folder. "Yesterday," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a grave whisper, "I uncovered a hidden financial ledger. Over the last 3 months, while her memory has been failing, my mother has been quietly authorizing catastrophic, unauthorized allocations into defunct R&D sectors. She is burning through our liquid capital." She opened the folder and slid copies of the Ghost Report across the mahogany table. The board members grabbed them eagerly, their eyes scanning the fabricated numbers. I watched the color drain from Thomas's face. $40 million? One of the board members gasped, looking up in sheer panic. "Margaret, is this true?" Chloe didn't let me answer. She pulled another document from her bag, the thick stapled packet I knew all too well. "Because of this immediate threat to shareholder value, and supported by a sworn medical affidavit from Dr. William Harrison, I have filed an emergency petition for conservatorship." She placed the petition on the table with a heavy thud. "I am asking this board for an immediate vote of no confidence to remove Margaret Vance as CEO, and to appoint me as interim chief executive to stabilize the company and stop this financial hemorrhaging before the market opens tomorrow." Marcus Thorne leaned back in his chair, a look of absolute, arrogant satisfaction settling over his features. The trap had closed. The board was in a frenzy. Men were talking over each other, demanding explanations, looking at me as if I were a ticking time bomb that had just detonated in their laps. "Margaret," Thomas pleaded over the noise, his voice tight with panic. "Please tell me this report is a misunderstanding. Please tell me you haven't bankrupted our liquidity." I let the chaos reign for exactly 30 seconds. I let Chloe soak in the absolute peak of her triumph. I let her believe, down to the marrow of her bones, that she had won. And then I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood, smoothed the front of my suit, and looked around the table. The sheer, freezing authority in my posture acted like a vacuum, sucking the air and the noise out of the room. One by one, the board members fell silent. "Have you all finished panicking?" I asked. My voice was crisp, resonant, and entirely devoid of the frailty Chloe had spent months selling them. It was the voice of the woman who had built a billion-dollar empire while they were still learning how to read a balance sheet. Chloe's triumphant smile faltered just a fraction of an inch. "Thomas," I said, looking directly at the chairman, "you have known me for 25 years. You know that I do not make emotional decisions. I make data-driven decisions. So let us look at the data." I nodded to Arthur. He stood up, walked to the head of the table, and plugged a secure, encrypted flash drive into the boardroom's main projection system. The massive screens on the wall flickered to life. "First," I said, pointing to the screen, "let us address my severe cognitive decline. What you are looking at are the results of 3 independent neurological evaluations conducted over the last 48 hours by the heads of neurology at Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, and Mount Sinai." The medical documents flashed on the screen, highlighted with the doctor's summaries. "As you can read, my cognitive function is in the 99th percentile for my age group. I do not have Alzheimer's. I do not have dementia. I am sharper today than I was a decade ago." I turned my gaze slowly, deliberately, to my daughter. The affidavit Chloe provided was signed by Dr. Harrison, a man whose new clinic wing was entirely funded by a shell LLC owned by Mr. Marcus Thorne's venture capital firm. It is a fraudulent document bought and paid for to facilitate a hostile takeover. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Several board members whipped their heads around to stare at Marcus, whose smug smile had instantly vanished, replaced by a rigid, white-knuckled grip on the arms of his chair. "Mom, what are you doing?" Chloe demanded, her voice rising in pitch, the carefully crafted facade cracking. "You're confused. You're being paranoid. Look at the red folder. Look at the financial report." "Ah, yes, the red folder," I said softly, practically purring the words. I walked slowly around the edge of the table, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. I stopped right behind Chloe's chair. I could smell her expensive perfume. I could see the fine tremor in her hands. "Arthur," I commanded, "show them the master ledger." The screen shifted. The fake red folder data disappeared, replaced by the verified, watermarked, cryptographically secured master ledger from our external auditors, time-stamped at 6 a.m. that very morning. "As you can see, gentlemen," I announced to the room, "Vance Biotech has not spent $40 million on dead-end R&D. In fact, our liquid reserves are up 12% this quarter. The company is in the strongest financial position in its history." Thomas looked from the screen to the red folder in his hands, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. "But Margaret, what is this red report then? Where did Chloe get this?" "She got it from the output tray of the executive copier on the 39th floor, I replied smoothly, leaning down so my voice was right next to Chloe's ear. "Because I put it there." Chloe froze. The blood drained from her face so fast she looked like a marble statue. "It is a ghost report," I explained to the horrified board. "A piece of fabricated data I had my security team generate on an isolated dummy server. I used it as bait. And my chief strategy officer, so desperate to find a weapon to destroy me, so eager to bypass due diligence, took the bait, brought it into a legally binding board meeting, and presented it as fact to commit corporate fraud." "That's a lie!" Chloe shouted, leaping out of her chair clattering backward onto the floor. "You're setting me up. You deleted your own files. You missed those meetings. You're trying to frame me to cover your own incompetence." "I am framing no one," I said, stepping back and looking at her with an absolute, terrifying emptiness. I felt no motherly instinct. I felt nothing but the cold, surgical precision of an executive eliminating a threat. "Arthur, play the server logs." The screens changed one last time. This time it wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a recorded video feed from the IT department's internal tracking software, synced with the hallway security cameras. It showed the IP address of Chloe's private terminal actively accessing my computer at 2:14 a.m. on a Sunday. It showed the exact keystrokes used to permanently delete my Q3 projections. It showed the scripts she ran to intercept and delete my calendar invites. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a bomb going off, leaving everyone deafened in its wake. Chloe stood frozen, her mouth open, staring at the screen. The reality of her exposure was crashing down on her. The gaslighting, the manipulation, the lies. It was all laid bare in high-definition digital ink. Suddenly, Marcus Thorne stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, trying to project an air of command over a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of his control. "This is a deeply unfortunate family squabble," Marcus said, his voice loud and booming, attempting to wrest control of the narrative. "But the fact remains, Margaret, that the market demands new leadership. My firm, through proxy acquisitions over the last 6 months, controls 15% of the voting shares of Vance Biotech. We believe this internal chaos proves you cannot run this company. I am motioning for an immediate shareholder vote to force a restructuring and a buyout." He looked around the room, expecting the frightened board members to rally behind his capital. I actually laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that startled everyone in the room. "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," I said, walking back to the head of the table. "You don't own 15% of this company." Marcus frowned, his predatory eyes narrowing. "I have the proxy certificates right here, Margaret. You can't argue with SEC filings." "I don't need to argue with them," I replied, placing my hands flat on the mahogany table and leaning forward. "I just need to dilute them. Arthur, please explain to our guest what happened at midnight last night." Arthur stood up, opening a sleek black leather folder. Pursuant to the Vance Biotech Corporate Bylaws, Section 4, Paragraph B, the CEO retains the right to execute a shareholder rights plan commonly known as a poison pill, in the event of an unsolicited hostile takeover attempt orchestrated by an internal or external party. Arthur adjusted his glasses, looking at Marcus with the detached amusement of a coroner examining a corpse. When Ms. Vance filed the petition for emergency conservatorship with the intent to transfer voting power to a party colluding with your venture firm, the poison pill clause was automatically triggered. At midnight last night, Vance Biotech issued millions of new shares of stock to every existing shareholder at a 90% discount, excluding the hostile party. Marcus Thorne's face went from pale to a mottled apoplectic red. He understood the math instantly. Your 15% voting block, Mr. Thorne, I said softly, delivering the final fatal blow, has just been diluted to less than 0.5%. You have no voting power. You have no leverage. You just lost your firm over $80 million. Your partners are going to crucify you. Marcus stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked at Chloe, the woman who had promised him an easy victory, the woman who had assured him I was a senile old fool, with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Without saying a single word, Marcus grabbed his briefcase, turned on his heel, and practically ran out of the boardroom. The door slammed shut behind him, echoing like a gunshot. I turned my attention back to my daughter. She was shaking now, violently. The sophisticated, arrogant executive was gone, replaced by a terrified, cornered animal. She knew exactly what Marcus's departure meant. Marcus was her protection. Without him, he would hand her embezzlement file to the federal prosecutors just out of spite. "Mom," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking, tears streaming down her face. Real tears this time. "Mom, please, I had to. He was blackmailing me. He found out about a mistake I made at the old startup. He was going to send me to prison. I didn't want to hurt you. I had to survive." The board members looked at her in absolute disgust. She had just confessed to prior financial crimes in front of 12 corporate witnesses and the company's general counsel. I looked at the woman I had given birth to, the woman I had sacrificed my youth to protect. She was begging me to be a mother again. She was begging for the unconditional love she had spent the last 6 months trying to weaponize and destroy. "Arthur," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, "please pass out the final folders." Arthur handed a small black folder to Thomas and then slid one down the table to Chloe. "What is this?" Thomas asked, looking shell-shocked. "That is a formal resolution for the immediate termination of Chloe Vance from the position of Chief Strategy Officer, citing gross misconduct, corporate espionage, and breach of fiduciary duty," I stated clearly. "It also includes a restraining order barring her from entering any Vance Biotech property, effective immediately." Chloe sobbed, a loud, ugly sound that bounced off the glass walls. "Mom, you can't do this. I'm your daughter. I have nothing. If you fire me, Marcus will send me to jail. Please, I'm begging you." I looked at her, feeling a profound, terrifying emptiness where my heart used to be. "You stopped being my daughter the moment you signed that petition, Chloe," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it carried across the entire room. "I spent my entire life building an empire to hand to you, and instead of waiting your turn, you tried to bury me alive to steal it." I turned to the chairman. "Thomas, call the vote." Thomas didn't even look up from the table. "All in favor of immediate termination?" 12 hands went up, unanimous. "Security is waiting by the elevators, Ms. Vance," Arthur said, looking at Chloe. "I suggest you leave quietly." Chloe stood there for a long, agonizing moment, surrounded by the ruins of her career, her reputation, and her family. She looked at me one last time, searching my face for even a flicker of the mother she had betrayed. She found nothing but the cold, impenetrable armor of a CEO who had just defended her throne. She turned and walked out of the room, her shoulders shaking, her footsteps heavy and defeated. When the door clicked shut behind her, the boardroom was completely silent. 12 powerful men looked at me with a newfound, profound reverence. They had walked into this room expecting to watch an old woman fade away. Instead, they had watched her burn her enemies to ash. I sat back down in my chair at the head of the table. I smoothed my lapels, picked up my pen, and looked at the men who had doubted me. "Now," I said smoothly, opening the real Q4 financial report, "let's discuss our clinical trials. We have a lot of work to do."